It begins in stone, the kind of stone that forgets your name, even as it presses against the soles of your feet. Cold, gray, and wet with the memory of centuries. Not mist, not rain, just the sigh of old walls to crumble. That's how morning greets a king. Before titles, before the bowing, there is this stillness. It wraps around him like a forgotten childhood dream. Not a sweet one, the kind that lingers behind the ribs, making the breath feel borrowed. He does not wake to sunlight. He wakes to the sound of cloth. Servants move like ghosts, not speaking, not looking. One folds the heavy linens aside, another stokes the embers that never quite died in the hearth. The room breathes its first reluctant breath. The king does not sit up and he listens, not to voices, those come later. He listens for what isn't there. No war drums today, no foreign tongues corridors, no wife crying again in the chapel, just the rustle of wood, the iron groan of the brazier, and the distant toll of the monastery bell. Time, measured in obligation. This is the part the scrolls don't teach, the part without blood or glory, just the labor of existence. They think kings wake hungry, with, or lovers, or victories waiting at the door. But this morning, like all mornings, is a negotiation with the body. An ankle still swollen from the hunt, a knotted muscle beneath the shoulder from the too narrow saddle, an ache behind the eyes that no cares to name. He lets his arms rest on top of the bearskin throw. The fur is stiff, not soft, more ceremonial. He remembers when it was alive. It had breathed, once, growled. He had watched its last moment through an arrow's silent translation of fear. Now it guards his sleep like a reminder. You are what you conquer, but only for a little while. The chamber is tall, colder near the rafters where dust lives uninterrupted. Histories hang like weary witnesses, dipped of battles long out, saints with halos with sun, and lions that look more like dogs. They were not made for accuracy, they were made to watch. Everything in a king's life watches. The moment he moves, just a twitch of the hand, 3 attendants approach. He does not speak to them, not because he is cruel, but because it would make them real. And if they become real, he might have to feel something when they die. Better to let them be function. He sits. The ache sharpens, but he doesn't wince. There are no mirrors in this chamber, but he knows what his face would show, that faint downward pull around the mouth that doesn't leave, even when he laughs. There is a bowl of warm water placed before him. Steam curls like an old story no one tells anymore. He dips his hands in, not to clean, he's not dirty yet, but to remember the shape of warmth. He watches his fingers move beneath the surface. Kings do not often get to watch their hands. They are always being used. A towel is handed to him, linen, coarse, honest. He dries his hands and rises. The robe they dress him in weighs more than some men's armor. Deep red, with trim that once belonged to a bishop's cloak. Gold thread, stiff with ambition. Every stitch a tax, every button a prayer. No small choices when you wear your identity. He walks. The floor is uneven, even here in the royal apartments. Centuries of feet have worn it into a kind of topography, and his stride adjusts without thought. The walk to the chapel is silent, but not peaceful. Peace implies the absence of this is not that. This is containment. The hallway arches overhead like the ribcage of a dead god. Torches burn low. One of them sputters, a little too loudly, and a guard's hand moves instinct sword. Not drawn, just remembered. Outside the chapel doors, he stops. They will not open them yet. Not until the priest gives the nod. Ritual must always appear spontaneous. Faith must never be caught adjusting it. The king waits, not because he believes, but because belief believes in him. A bird calls somewhere of stone, something small, with a voice too sharp for this soft morning. No one else seems to hear it. The doors open. The chapel smells of wax and breath. The candles are not fresh. The benches have been worn smooth by knees more faithful than his. He does not kneel. He sits there designed to look, and fails. The prayers begin. Latin spills out like water from a broken cistern. It's meant to be incomprehensible. Holiness sounds more convincing in a language no one uses to curse their livestock. He doesn't listen. Instead, he watches the way the sunlight through the stained glass, noticing which saints have lost their faces, which colors no longer glow. He wonders if God notices. They say kings are chosen by divine will, that the crown rests where heaven places it. But he remembers the blood. His father's, mostly. Then his brother's. Then the blood of the man who looked just a little too long at his mother in court. There was no divine in that, just timing. The prayer ends with a pause that might be silence or might be doubt. The priest looks up, pretending not to be exhausted. The king nods. A mutual lie is complete. Back in the hall, the steward awaits. There is parchment, seals, names that need the weight of his hand, not his mind. He will sign them all before breakfast. Not because they matter, but because it's easier than asking what they are. There are guests in the outer chamber, foreign envoys, a baron with a sickly air, a woman claiming her husband was taken by wolves near the edge of the forest. All voices waiting to be believed. But first, bread. The kitchen sends up hard rolls, salted butter, and an egg still warm inside its shell. He eats with the quiet tone of someone trying not to remember what tastes like. Flavor is a luxury, hunger is a tool. As he finishes, the steward clears his throat. The baron first, then the woman, then the envoys. The day has begun, and all he's done is survive the morning. There's a sound that stone makes when walked upon often enough. It isn't a creak, like wood. It's more like a sigh, subtle, slow, and final. The kind of sound that doesn't beg to be noticed. It assumes you will. The king steps through the gallery, flanked on both sides by torchlight and silence. The silence isn't complete, silence never is, but it has the illusion of control. Controlled steps, controlled breath. Even the flicker of flame obeys the geometry of order. Everything is by design, even him. To rule is to be seen, even when you're not being watched. Especially then. The first meeting of the day is with Elric of Wither, a man whose voice arrives before his body, sharp and at fast, as though trying to outrun the weight of his own insignificance. He is already speaking as the doors open. Your Grace, I bring word from the northern blight again. The cattle won't last through winter without grain diverted from the southern granaries. The king doesn't respond immediately, not because he's weighing the request, but because silence makes and nervous men reveal themselves. Elric shifts on his feet. He's dressed too richly for the situation. New velvet, wide cuffs, the kind of embroidery meant to distract from bad news. The king's eyes trace the man's jawline. Shaven. He shaved to beg. The grain belongs to the south, the king says evenly. Yes, but the south thrives, your grace. Their harvest doubled last year. Because they were not busy mismanaging their soil. Elric opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again. This time with humility but not lived. The blight wasn't predicted. Our apothecaries. The south predicted theirs, the king replies. And they acted. You asked the sky for mercy. It gave you ash. There is no anger in his voice. Just the quiet inevitability of a man who speaks with time behind him. Kings don't need to raise their tone. They speak as if history is already listening. Your Grace, Elric pleads now. If we lose the cattle, riders. If we lose the riders, the border weakens. The king doesn't blink. That is the real request, protection. It always is. The language of need just dresses itself differently depending on who wears it. I will send a third of the grain, he says. Elric bows too quickly. Your generosity comes with a condition, the king interrupts. Your brother's son will stay here, as my ward. The words fall like snow, soft, inevitable, burying everything. Elric freezes. A ward, he asks carefully. A symbol, the king says. That your loyalty grows with the same urgency as your need. It is not even a threat. It is simply how power circulates, by collecting pieces of other men's bloodlines until the throne feels less like a seat and more like a net. Elric agrees. He has no other choice. And for a moment, he looks like a man who has misplaced the concept of justice. The king doesn't watch him leave. Instead, he studies the grain of the table. The rings of oak beneath his fingers tell more truth than most men's mouths. Trees do not lie, they only record. Next is the woman. She is not introduced. She is not announced. He steps into the chamber as though pulled forward by something older than protocol. Cloak is wet from the morning mist. Hair is braided not for beauty, but function. She curtsies, not deeply, not awkwardly, but as if she remembers what respect once felt like before it became obligation. They took my husband, she says simply. Who did? Wolves. He waits for laughter. None comes. Her hands stay folded, unclenched. She is not dramatic. She is precise. He went into the woods near Glen. That was 6 nights ago. No blood, no tracks, just the scream. Others might scoff, or smile, or find an excuse to exit politely. But the king's eyes narrow, not with fear, but memory. Wolves. He has heard that word spoken like this before. Not as animals, but as something else. Something you don't describe with teeth or fur. Something that waits until the world is to name it. What was he carrying? The king asks. A lantern, she says. Nothing else. She hesitates. Then, a relic. From where? An abbey. Abandoned. Burned during the old revolt. He exhales, slow. That revolt predates her. Predates most of the court. He remembers it. The kind of memory that doesn't live in the mind, but under the skin. There are stories from that time best left untranslated. He dismisses, but gently, offers a silver token. It isn't currency, its access. She can return, if needed. Most peasants never see one in their lives. She accepts it without she knows that gratitude isn't the currency here. It's belief. And belief has been running low lately. The final guests are envoys from across the Eastern Channel. Smooth robes, smoothed faces. Their smiles are precise, like blades with decorative handles. They bring maps. Maps that don't match the ones in his archives. Borders drawn. Rivers that bend differently. A village erased. A new fort built where none had the king's permission. He listens, not to the pitch, but to the gaps. What they don't say. Where they don't look. They mention trade partnerships. They mean tribute. They offer mutual protection. They mean surveillance. They say shared language. They mean silence. When they leave, he turns to the steward. Send word to the naval captains. Quietly. Yes, Your Grace. Tell them to stop the third rock. The steward hesitates. That's not where the border is drawn. I know. There is no announcement for the midday bell. It tolls only once, but the sound lingers, like metal cooling after war. The day is not half over, but already he feels the weight of three kinds of loyalty pressing against his shoulders, the kind that lies, the kind that begs, and the kind that vanishes in the woods and is never spoken of again. He returns to the gallery. The torchlight hit. The walls seem narrower. Maybe it's the light. Maybe it's the years. He stops before a stained glass window depicting of a saint he no longer remembers the name of. The face is worn away by sun. He stares, and for a brief moment, he wonders what it's like to disappear not in violence, but in forgetting. To be no longer needed. To be no longer believed. The thought leaves lightly as it came, because there is still bread to be broken, still maps to redraw, still wolves, and those who believe in them, and still, always, stone, waiting for another step, another sigh, another wait. He turns, and walks toward the next hour. In the great hall, the table stretches longer than memory. Oak, worn smooth by generations of elbows and ink. It doesn't creak. It absorbs. Spilled wine. False promises. The wet breath of dying men who didn't know they were dying until their voice stopped echoing off its surface. It is not a table. It is a trap. A beautiful one. The king sits at its, not because he must, but because the room allows for no other geometry. Every chair angles itself toward his, slightly, like iron filings around a magnet. Even in absence, he would still be the center. Today, he is not absent. Today, he is hungry. The noon meal is not a feast. That comes later, when the sun has the decency to fall. Midday is utility, hard bread, broth with the thin of meat. This is not food for pleasure. This is food that reminds the body it is a tool. Still, the ritual matters. Each dish arrives under cover, lifted with a flair that no one enjoys but everyone expects. Each bite is tasted first, not for flavor, but for poison. The taster is a boy of maybe 16. He moves efficiently, without fear. Fear is a luxury for men with choices. The king does not watch the boy. He knows better. To watch someone risk your death for you is not noble. It's obscene. He waits for the nod. The boy gives it. The king eats. Around him, the council assembles. First, Lord Treasurer Briar, hands stained with ink and fingers that twitch when too many eyes fall on them. He carries a ledger like it's a confession. Then, Lady Imrine, keeper of the scrolls, whose eyes have not missed a single twitch in 20 years. Truth the way others see weather, always changing, always inevitable. Next, High Marshal Darnick, muscle gone to seed, but eyes like whetted stone. He still believes in swords. And finally, Father Corlin, spiritual advisor. Thin, pale, more shadow than man. He speaks, but when he does, the room loses warmth. Together, they form a circle of mouths, all waiting for the king to speak. He breaks his bread slowly. The crust is hard enough to scrape the roof of his mouth. He chews anyway. He swallows. And only then does he say, "Show me the dead villages." Imrine moves first. A map is unrolled across the table. The others lean forward. The room adjusts around the paper like a lung inhaling. 4 red marks. Inland. Near the forest, but not within. Empty, she says. No fire, no struggle. Doors left open. Livestock unharmed. And no bodies. She shakes her head. Briar shifts. Plague. No signs. Imrine answers. No rot. No trail. Just absence. Father Corlin folds his fingers. Sometimes God does not leave a body. Only silence. The king does not look at him. Sometimes God has nothing to do with it, he says. Darnick clears his throat. If it's an enemy, they're clever. No army moves without a trail. No looters leave flour. Imrine adds, it's as if they stopped being. Not slain, not stolen, just, unmade. The table feels colder. The king lifts his cup, drinks. The wine is bitter, early grapes, poorly spiced. He prefers it that way. Sweetness in wine is a lie. We send no banners, he says. No horses, no horns. We send silence. Darnick stiffens. You want to sneak into our... I want to listen without being heard. Breyer frowns. That's not a war tactic. No, the king agrees. It's older than war. For a moment, no one speaks. Outside, the sun hangs in the upper sky like a blade balanced on its edge. Inside, shadows pool beneath the table. There are no candles lit. It is too early for that, but still, it feels like dusk in the corners. Imrine rolls up the map. The parchment whispers. The king turns to Corlin. Has the abbey near word? Not in 2 seasons, Corlin says. They claimed a holy silence. The king narrows his eyes. Convenient. They always were fond of theatrical obedience. That earns the ghost of a smile from the king. He rises. The others do not. Not until he passes the head of the table. Only then do chairs scrape softly backward, as though unwilling to admit they held anyone important. He walks the hall slowly, letting the meal settle into his body like a stone in water. He is not full. Kings are never full. Fullness makes you sleep, and sleep makes you vulnerable. At the far end of the room, he pauses beneath a hanging banner, deep blue, embroidered with the silver crest of his line, a falcon descending, claws out, eyes closed. It is a strange symbol, chosen centuries ago by a king who believed real power was the strike before the eyes opened. The current king does not disagree. He studies the banner now, noticing how the edges have begun, not visibly, not to a guest, but to a man who has seen too many things fall apart. Yes, it is clear, thread by thread. That is how kingdoms die, not in fire, not in revolt, but in forgetting which threads hold the banner in place. Later, in the scriptorium, he walks alone. The floor here is different, not stone, but planks, softer, warmer. This is where memory lives, in ink, in scrolls, in the brittle breath of old librarians who murmur to themselves as they sort fragments of law and legend. The king nods to the old man hunched near the man doesn't look up. He never does. But his hand lifts in response, slow and trembling, like smoke curling from a dying candle. He finds the scroll he's looking for on instinct, not because it is marked, not because it is titled, because his fingers know the weight. He unrolls it carefully. No rush, no need. This is not about reading. This is about remembering. It is said that once, the forest grew teeth, not branches, not vines, teeth, and in the mouths of the trees, men vanished, not screaming, but mid-sentence, as if conversation itself could be devoured. He reads the line again. It isn't history, it's myth, but myths are just histories told by survivors. He leaves the scroll unrolled. Let others read it. Let them wonder why their king, at noon, chose an old tale over new taxes. Because sometimes, the past doesn't knock turns. It seeps, and in the bones of the floor, in the fraying edges of banners, in the eyes of women whose husbands scream once and disappear, it is already here. Still, there are things to do. Still, there is dinner to attend. Still, there is the slow, daily work of ruling without ever admitting that something is watching. He steps back into the light, and prepares to welcome the evening. By the time the light begins to slope down the walls of the West Tower, the castle has started its subtle transformation. Torches aren't lit all at once. That would admit the dark. Instead, they flicker into existence one by one, like concessions, tiny signs to the truth that day is dying. In the corridors, the servants move faster now. Their silence has shifted in tone, not reverent, but efficient. The kind of silence a blade makes just before it cuts. Every motion is a performance. Every glance, a rehearsal. For what? For dinner. For power. The king knows this dance. He does not enjoy it, but he does not. You cannot the wind that turns the mill. It is indifferent to your feelings. It simply turns. He changes his robe. This one is darker, deep violet, with black embroidery that only reveals itself in certain angles of firelight. Designed not to impress, but to haunt the memory. No jewels, no crown, just the weight of recognition. Everyone in the will already know who he is. What he wears only reminds them that he knows it, too. The evening banquet is not a feast, not in the gluttonous sense. There are courses, yes, but they are as much signal as sustenance. Boar for strength, figs for diplomacy, honeyed nuts to suggest prosperity, bread, always, to suggest peace. Peace is a flavor, after all, subtle, dry, hard to swallow if you know where it comes from. By the time the king enters the hall, the chamber is already half full. Nobles of varying loyalty stand in clusters like flocks of birds unsure which wind to trust. Their laughter is staged, their just choreographed. A court is not a family, It is a mirror held too close to the face. Trumpets do not sound. That would be gauche. Instead, a herald simply announces, His Majesty, not the King, not Lord of all southern lands, just His Majesty, no name required, not here, not anymore. He walks slowly. Each step echoes differently depending on who hears it. For some, it's assurance. For others, warning. For most, it is just a sound they know not to interrupt. He sits, and that simple act changes the temperature of the room. A toast is offered. Not by him, of course. Never by him. That would suggest need. Instead, it is Lord Pelin, and with a fondness for performance, who raises his goblet and declares, to the quiet strength of it's vague, safely so. The goblets rise. The mouths follow. The king drinks last. The meal begins. At the far end of the hall, and strike their chords. A slow, lilting refrain designed to fade into the walls. Music that doesn't ask to be heard, only noticed when it stops. He eats with measured pace. Every bite is considered, not for taste, but for timing. You cannot speak wisely with grease on your lips. You cannot rule with broth spilling from your chin. Even the act of chewing must obey the architecture of command. To his left whispers a rumor that a foreign emissary arrived in the eastern harbor with a parchment sealed in green wax. She does not know what it says, only that it was taken directly to the bishop's hall without passing through customs. To his right, Lord Terran makes a quiet complaint that his cousin's estate was taxed twice for the same parcel of land. He suspects clerical error. He suspects sabotage. He suspects everything but the truth, that the crown is quietly starving its disloyal mouths. The king nods but speaks to neither. This is not the time for solutions. This is the time for listening. Listening in a way that makes people forget they're being. The meal unfolds in waves. Pomegranate seeds in silver bowls. Duck glazed with bitter plums. Parsnips so carefully carved they seem less grown than summoned. But the food is not the point. This is the real machinery. Not the throne room. Not the parchment. The table. It is here, in the ebb and flow of courses, that allegiances are measured, betrayals whispered, and empires in the grave. Not with swords, with smiles. A jester performs briefly. He juggles daggers, tells a story about a talking goat that mimics the king's voice. Laughter spills unevenly. The jester's eyes foot the throne as he bows. He wants him to live. The king gives it with a slight nod. And just like that, the room exhales. A new course is served. Fish this time. Salted just enough to remind you that the ocean waits. Then, without ceremony, the steward leans in and murmurs something into the king's ear. A pause. No change in expression. The king stands. No announcement. No excuse. No apology. The hall quiets. Conversations pause mid-syllable. Knives still in the act of slicing hesitate. Even the musicians falter. He speaks only one line. Continue without me. And then he leaves. No one follows. In the corridor, the torchlight feels sharper. The night has fully arrived, and with it, a different kind of truth. He walks toward the western tower. Not fast, not slow, just with intent. The steward follows now, 2 steps behind. They found it, he said. Where? In the hollow behind the chapel ruins, near the glen. And, nothing left, just a shoe, no foot. The king says nothing. The steward adds, were markings on the trees. Burned in. What kind? The steward hesitates. Then, not letters. The king stops. They are near the old door now. Iron, stained from centuries of rain and rusted memory. Behind it, stairs that spiral downward, toward the keep's original foundation. Few remember it exists. He looks at the steward. Bring me the relic. Which one? You know which. The steward nods. Disappears. The king opens the door himself. The air is different here. Not stale. Not cold. Just, still. The kind of stillness that isn't quiet, but listening. He descends. Each step a memory. Each landing a question. Down and down, past where the stone was carved by hand, into the rock where, at the bottom, a chamber. Bare. Round. The walls marked with something older than paint. Symbols that resist translation. Not forgotten. Just, remembered incorrectly. He stands in the center. And waits. Not for a sign. Not for God. Just for the sound. It comes slowly. Not from the walls, not from the door above, from below, a deep, slow groan, like the earth sighing in its sleep. It says nothing, but he understands. Tomorrow, he will send no men to the forest. Tomorrow, he will burn the chapel ruins. Tomorrow, he will declare a holy fast. But tonight, he will return to the hall. He will sit at the table that eats men, and smile, because no one else needs to know. That something has begun listening back. The door closes behind him with the weight of stone settling into place. Not loud, not abrupt, just final, like a memory you tried not to keep. He stands there for a moment in the corridor between the hidden stairwell and the rest of the keep, caught in that seam between the official world and the underlayers of his kingdom. The faintest smear of dust clings to his sleeve, from brushing against the wall in the deep chamber below. He doesn't wipe it away. Let them see it. Let them what he's been. Let their imagination do the work fear never finishes. The great hall is still murmuring when he returns. A few heads turn. Most do not. That is the rule in court. Do not stare too directly at power. It might notice you noticing, and then it might remember. He resumes seat. The jester has vanished. In his place, a soft chorus of stringed instruments plays a lullaby for royal infants, now performed without voice. Just the tune, gentle, almost sweet, but slow enough to remind you that laws are not for the living. They are for the quieting. A steward leans in, refilling the king's goblet. The wine is redder now, darker, a vintage brought up from the cellars only during eclipses and coronations. Tonight is neither, but it tastes appropriate. To his left, Lady Mara resumes her soft prattle, this time about a noblewoman who went missing 3 winters ago and was found last month, barefoot and smiling, and she'd aged 20 years, though no one knew why. She didn't speak, Mara says, just wept when they tried to bring her indoors. The king listens with half an ear, not to her words. It's different now, faster, tighter, like someone trying to hold their own attention. Fear does that. To his right, Lord Taryn has grown, watching the door with the kind of stillness usually reserved for prey. He says nothing, doesn't eat, just fingers the ring on his left hand, over and over again, like a rosary without purpose. The king lifts his goblet, sips. Wine stings a little. Good. He leans forward, just enough to feel the pull of gravity that surrounds him when he chooses to speak. There will be a right tomorrow, he says softly. Mara stills. Taryn blinks. A right? The old kind, the king answers. He lets these sit between them, like a knife laid gently on silk. And speaks first. We haven't done one. Not since before the war. The king nods. That's the point. Mara leans closer, voice low. And who will perform it? I will. Neither of them responds. Not immediately, not with words, but he sees it, subtle things. Taryn's shoulders retract half an inch. Mara's hands disappear beneath the table, clenched now in her lap. The old rites are not remembered publicly. They live in margins, in footnotes, in the dark places behind cathedral walls where even the priests forget to dust. They are not violent, they are not loud, but they are binding. And that's what unsettles people. Not the mystery, the finality. That night, he dreams of crows. Not flocks, not chaos, just one. It sits on the edge of a field that stretches endlessly in every direction. No crops, no paths, just soil, damp and black and glistening like something alive. The head, watching him. It doesn't call, doesn't fly. It waits. He wakes before dawn. The sky outside his chamber window is colorless, as if the day hasn't made up its mind yet. Neither night nor morning. Just pause. A servant waits with hot water and his ceremonial garments. Not the royal ones, the old ones. They smell of worn cloth dyed with things no longer grown. Patterns stitched by hands that died before anyone remembered their names. These robes are not beautiful. They are true. And truth has never needed beauty. The rite begins at first light. Not in the chapel, not in the hall, but in the clearing, sacred space behind the northern wall, long abandoned, ringed by dead trees that refuse to fall. It is the only place in the kingdom where no birds sing, not even the crows. The ground here is not soil, it is packed memory. Already, the chosen are assembled. 6 men, 3 women, each touched by the strangeness that has begun to curl through the kingdom like steam from a cracked door. One man lost his voice after dreaming of a well that never ended. One woman has not slept in 4 days, but claims another saw his dead sister in the mirror's hair. They do not speak now. They do not bow. They simply kneel. The king stands in the center of them, drawn over his face. A priest begins the rite. Not Father Corlin. Corlin refused. Said the words were not meant for this world. The replacement is younger, barely old enough to shave. But his voice is steady as it's from the ash-stained scroll. He doesn't blink once. The king closes his eyes. The prayer is not to God. It is to memory. To the thing that lives beneath names, beneath faces, beneath even stone. To the part of the world that doesn't change, not because it resists, but because it remembers how the first shape felt and refuses to become anything else. As the final words are spoken, the wind shifts, but not in a way that moves leaves. It moves thoughts. For a moment, every person in the clearing forgets their own name. They remember the king's, and they feel a pressure behind their ribs, like something waking up inside their blood. Then, silence, no applause, no incense, no holy light, just the king, standing taller now, and the feeling, deep and cold, that something has agreed, something old. Later, he sits in his chamber, still in the robes, the cloth, not physically, psychically, itches like an old skin. A servant enters without knocking. She places a tray beside him, bread, cheese, wine, a single fig. He doesn't eat. Instead, he looks at the fig, soft, wrinkled, red at the center. It reminds him of the stories once told around hearthfires, of how the first king of their line did not fight for his crown. From a seed, planted where a child died, watered with silence, harvested with sleep. The story was meant to be poetic. Now it feels anatomical. A knock. The steward again. We've had word, sire, he says. The king lifts his gaze. From the chapel. No. From Harrow's Glen. A farmer's dog returned this morning, covered in but no burns. The king leans forward, and it was carrying a jawbone. Human, still wet. A long pause. The king asks. We don't know. It had no teeth. The king sits back, slowly. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He just thinks about what kind of silence pulls teeth, but leaves a hole. Because this is no longer history. This is memory with claws. By mid-morning, the clouds have begun to layer. Not thick enough to bring rain, but heavy enough to dim the color of the fields. Everything looks like a painting left too long in a damp cellar. The wheat doesn't shine. The stones don't reflect. Even the castle seems grayer, as though caught halfway between being seen and being remembered. The king watches the sky from the window of his solar. He's not looking for signs. He doesn't believe in those anymore. He's looking for confirmation. And the clouds say what no man dares admit. Something is lowering. The steward clears his throat behind him. The abbess has arrived, your majesty. Bring her to the observatory. He doesn't wait for a response. The observatory isn't used much anymore. It sits at the corner of the keep, above the old astronomer's quarters, where maps of forgotten constellations still fade slowly under layers of dust. It isn't meant for ceremony. It isn't meant for prayer. It's a room made for looking, which is why he meets her there. The abbess enters without fear. She's tall, older than she seems, wrapped in robes the color of dry wood and candle smoke. That's why he invited her. There are too many people in this castle trying to bend the world with their spines. You didn't send word. Calmly. I didn't want to give you time to refuse. She smiles, thinly, and if I had, I would have sent soldiers. She nods. Honest, at least. The wind shifts through the broken arch of the windows. Flutter. The king remains still. You know why you're here, he says. I do. You remember the old rites. I remember their shadows. He walks slowly toward the far wall, where an old brass covered in. He pulls it back. The instrument finished, rings bent slightly with age and the warping of seasons. Still, the symbols are visible. He spins it gently. It clicks. It hums. He watches. This was built, he says, for things we were never meant to touch. Angles. Orbits. The weight of what stares back. And yet, you do them anyway. Because we have to. Because we stopped being ruled by myths, and now we're by what myths remember. She tilts her head. You felt it then. He nods once. The woods are closing, he says. And the soil doesn't settle anymore. It listens. He steps closer to the window. The glen is visible from here, a dark smear in the otherwise obedient landscape. Nothing grows there, even now, in high summer. Not even moss. There's something in it, she whispers. Not in, under. The abbess to face him. You brought me here to ask what the church never wrote down. He says nothing. He steps forward, meeting his eyes without flinching. What you're dealing with isn't new. It isn't demonic. It's local. You buried it here with your foundations. Built your walls over its mouth. And now that your kingdom forgets its own shape, it remembers. He doesn't blink. Tell me what it wants. She laughs. A dry, papery thing. What makes you think it wants? He waits. She sighs. Move toward the pendant at her neck. A sunburst, silver. She takes it off, sets it on the ledge, but it echoes more than the armillary did. There was once a name for it, says, but it wasn't a word. It was a sound. A long, slow scraping, like something being pulled from the bottom of a dry well. You didn't say it. You remembered it. Or it remembered you. He speaks, voice low. The forest calls now. Yes. Men vanish. Yes. And dogs come back with bones. She looks at him sharply. They're warnings, not trophies. The king looks down at the glen. Even from here, it seems deeper than it is. Then what do I do? The abbess doesn't answer for a long time. When she does, her voice is quieter than the wind. Kings are used to naming things, commanding them. But this is older than naming, older than will. It doesn't listen. It waits, and when the world goes quiet enough, it moves. He turns sharply toward her. Then why now? Why me? His gaze with something colder than contempt. Because you let your kingdom forget. You gave them simpler stories. You buried complexity. You cut down the trees that remembered. You drained the marshes that whispered. You built walls against memory, and memory took offense. He breathes slowly through his nose. And if I remember, she leans close. Close enough that he can see the creases around her eyes, like roots, burrowing. Then it won't need to move. Because you will. He doesn't return to the great hall. He doesn't eat. Instead, he walks the courtyard alone, trailing his hand across the stone walls as if reacquainting himself with something he once ruled but never loved. The bricks are colder than they should be, even in summer. Especially in summer. He stops near the old well. It's been boarded shut for years, deemed unsafe. Too dry. But now, looking at it, he sees something he didn't before. The boards aren't warped. They're bent inward, as if something below has pulled. He doesn't touch them. He just kneels at it, and listens. Nothing. No breath. No wind. No voice. But in that perfect absence, he hears something deeper than sound. Recognition. Later that night, he has the abbess escorted to a guarded room. He gives her ink and parchment. No instructions. She knows what to write. He, meanwhile, descends again, back to the chamber below the keep. This time, he brings no torch, no steward, no robes. He sits in the dark, and he speaks to the floor, not in prayer, not in defiance, in apology. I know I called you myth. He places a hand flat against the stone. I know I named you forest, fog, madness. I know I ruled over lands you shaped, and I claimed them as mine. Silence. And I know now, the trees weren't speaking. They were translating. He closes his eyes, and says the word that never had letters. The long, slow scraping sound. The one he remembered wrong all. And the ground, not violently, just gently, sinks an inch, as if adjusting its posture. As if, we remember too. By morning, the castle breathes differently. Not louder, not quieter, just deeper. As if the stone has begun to take longer between heartbeats. A slow pulse through the mortar, barely noticeable, unless you've lived here long enough to feel it in your teeth. The king dresses himself, not out of pride or rebellion, there's no one to see it, but because there are fewer things now he trusts close to his body. The robe he chooses is simple, a worn green, faded along the seams, not royal, not sacred, just remembered. It was his brother's once, before the crown found a different path. There's a message waiting on the table, folded parchment, no seal. Inside, a drawing, a crude map, circles and lines, a mark that isn't ink but soot, pressed into the page like a fingerprint from something long since burned. No signature, but he knows who sent it. He leaves through the servants' archway, where the ceilings are lower and the air tastes of soap and heat and forgotten arguments. No guards, no ceremony. Just the kitchen boy asleep on a bag of flour and a woman washing carrots like they insulted her. He walks past them, unnoticed. The way out leads through a storage tunnel, an old one, not used since the grain tax revolt, when they buried half the castle's original passages out of fear they might be used against it. But this one was never sealed, only hidden, behind a shelving rack of broken cabras and too fragile to keep. He pulls the rack aside. The wall cold air. He enters. The tunnel is narrow. Stone on one side, soil on the other. Architecture, half excavation. It was never meant for carts or soldiers. Just for a single man, maybe two, to pass quietly when no one was supposed to know. He walks slowly. There are markings along the wall. At first, they seem like scratches, the incidental scarring of war and vermin. But as he follows the path, they begin to arrange themselves into something else. Not letters, not language, order. The kind of order you don't notice unless you already feel it in your bones. He reaches the gate after 37 steps. It isn't a door, not in the way doors are supposed to be. It's a void in the wall, round, perfect, as if something that doesn't make mistakes. Around its edges, burn marks, not from fire, from friction, from passage. He doesn't hesitate. He steps through. Outside, the forest is closer than it should be. The glen begins here, just at the edge of the northern ridge. But the trees aren't where they used to be. They've moved, inward, as though leaning in to hear better. He steps into them. There is no birdsong, no rustle, no sense of life. But the air is thick, not hot, not wet, just aware. The path is overgrown, but not with vines or grass. With echoes, the kind that catch you when you try to speak too loud. He walks in silence. He doesn't need the map. He remembers the turns. Left at right where the three stones form a triangle, though one always seems missing when you blink. Down the shallow slope where the moss looks like velvet but smells like iron. At the bottom, a circle of stumps. 13. Always 13, even when men have tried to count 14. In the center, a boy waits. Not a child, just young. Too young to be part of this, but too old to be spared. He's barefoot, eyes black from lack of sleep or something deeper, holding a bowl carved from ashwood, filled with something dark and still. He doesn't speak once, and then he drinks. The king watches him, then turn, then walk into the trees without looking back. The bowl remains, still full. This is the place. This is where the first king knelt, not in prayer, but in exchange. The story has been over centuries, turned into tales for firesides and tapestry. He bargained with the forest, they say. He made a pact with the land. But the truth is heavier. The king offered something, and something answered. That something had no name, so it was given many. Whisper root, the beneath one, the last silence. But the first king just called it what he felt when it arrived. Wait, and that wait never left. He kneels, not as ruler, not as penitent, just as witness. The soil under his knees is softer than it should be, not muddy, just, as if welcoming pressure, as if used to hosting kings. He speaks, not aloud, not inwardly, somewhere between. Is it memory you want? Silence. Is it fear? Still nothing. But there's movement. Not wind, just a slow shifting. The way bones move when the body has forgotten how to carry them. He presses his hand to the ground, not asking, just offering. And he feels it, the way a man might feel the ocean through the deck of a ship. That impossible sense that there's depth below, and it doesn't care about you, but you're there. The forest doesn't speak. It accepts. When he stands, the bowl is empty. The stumps are gone. The sky overhead has darkened, not to night, but to something other. A twilight that doesn't respect the sun. He walks back differently. The trees don't move, but they're closer now, as if trying to remember his shape. Back in the castle, no one sees him enter. The door near the kitchen is empty. He ascends the western tower again, not to speak, not to gather counsel, but to look. From this height, he can see the path through the forest. Except it's not there. It was. Now, it isn't. Just a wall of green. And beneath it, something breathing. Not fast, not slow, just waiting. The steward enters without knocking. They've found another, he says. In the river this time. Still walking, still breathing. But the skin. Wrong? The king says. The steward nods. Too smooth. Like something that remembered what a body looked like, but not how it was made. The king turns back to the window. Below is flicker along the parapets. The guard walks in patrols that no longer feel protective. Even the walls seem to flinch now. He doesn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, it's begun. The steward hesitates. What has? The king looks down at the soil. The same soil that swallowed, that kept the stumps, that built the trees. And in a voice that sounds more like memory than command, he says, it. Then, more, and we are already inside it. The council meets at dusk, not by tradition, not by law, but because this hour makes liars honest. The light has softened just enough to let fear pass through the cracks between titles. They gather in the king's private chamber, not the court hall. Fewer torches, lower ceiling. No echoes. It's where truths are harder to ignore because there are no banners to hide behind. Just air, and the heavy unspoken things. Lord Terran arrives first. He looks older than yesterday, as if something in him slept poorly, and woke up aged. His ring finger is bare. No explanation offered. Lady Mara follows. Her lips are stained red from wine, but her hand too slow for drunkenness. She avoids the king's eyes. She knows what's waiting. Then the High Marshal, Darnick, sword is unbuckled. He's carried it every day for years, even to dinners. Now it hangs on a hook behind him, and he doesn't seem to miss it. Last comes Imrine. The keeper of scrolls does not knock. She enters without looking at anyone, holding a single piece of parchment. When she lays it on the table, no one reaches for it. The king reads it aloud. The name is not spoken. It is a place. It is not a place. It is a pattern. It is not a pattern. It is memory under pressure. It is not memory. It is the cost of forgetting. Silence. Terran clears his throat, but Mara frowns. Is that prophecy? Imrine shakes her head. Worse. It's description. The king looks at her. Where did you find it? In the archives, she says. Between a village that no longer exists. Which village? She meets his eyes. Harrow's Glen. A quiet chill moves through the room like smoke. None of them speak its name again. The king leans back in his chair. It creaks. The sound feels like something falling apart. The forest is moving, he says simply. Not physically. Psychically. It doesn't cross borders. It removes the idea of a border altogether. Darnik narrows his eyes. So we're under siege. No, Imrine replies. Which implies intent. This isn't warfare. It's digestion. Mara shivers. Digestion of what? His voice is hoarse. Us. Outside. Gone out at once. No wind. No hands. Just darkness. The guards on the wall feel it first. That slow drift of silence where a voice should be. One of them reaches for the bell rope and finds only wet ash between his fingers. No flame. No rope. No bell. Just the sky, which is not dark, but distant. Back in the chamber, the steward bursts in without ceremony. He does not bow. He is panting. The rivers, he says, eyes wild. They've turned backward. The water's flowing upstream. The council stares. Imrine speaks first. That's not a flood. No, the king murmurs. It's a reversal. Terran steps forward. Of what? The king looks toward the window. Of assumption. They send a rider. South. Fast. He doesn't return. Not because he dies, but because when the second rider is sent an hour later, he finds no road. Just a field. Where there was no field, the horse refuses to cross, and the sun above it glows slightly green. That night, the king stands alone in the old chapel, not the one still used by the priests. The first one, the ruined one, caved in, walls overtaken by ivy too black to be planted. Here, the saints have no faces. Their halos have baked into symbols no one translates. He kneels, not to pray, to wait, and after a time he cannot measure, because time no longer fits into hours. He footsteps, not behind him, not on stone, beneath it. Something is walking under the floor, and when it stops, the chapel tilts slightly, as if gravity has begun to shift its loyalties. The king doesn't move. He speaks downward. I remember. And the ground beneath him. In the castle, Lady Mara is found writing on the wall. Her own blood. She does not speak. She does not blink. Her message reads, we broke the soil's promise, and it is reminding itself of our shape. The king gathers the council at midnight. This time, no robes, no servants, just 6 people and the weight between them. He places a stone on the table, smooth, oval, unremarkable. Then he says, this was in my bed this morning. They stare at it. It hums, not audibly, but the kind of hum you feel in your molars, long after the sound has ended. What is it? Terran asks. Imrine answers, a seed. Mara frowns. It looks like a stone. Imrine doesn't look away from it. That's because it grew in the mouth of the earth, not in the sky. The king speaks softly. It's not meant to become something. He pauses. It's meant to remember something. The castle begins to bend, not collapse, not break, bend, as though the angles it was built upon are no longer recognized by the world. The great hall's pillars now lean subtly inward. The staircase is 1 step shorter than before. The mirrors in the queen's chamber reflect moments that haven't happened yet. A servant places a loaf of bread on a tray and watches as it molds within seconds. When he blinks again, he does not blink again. At dawn, the king orders silence. No bells, no horns, no prayers, nothing that might disturb the pattern. And across the castle, something exhales in approval. In his chamber, the king studies a map of the kingdom. Except now, parts of it are blank. Not erased, just forgotten. Where once there were rivers, there is space. Where once there were cities, a faint suggestion of something wet. The lines that define borders slightly at the edges, as though they're retreating. He touches the center, his own name. It smudges under his finger, like it was never really ink. That evening, they hear singing from the well, not human, but not animal either. A kind of lullaby with no words, only the pattern of words, only the idea that words once existed. A child hears it and forgets his mother's face. A knight hears it and draws his sword against the wall. The king hears it, and not because he understands it, but because part of him always has. In the forest, something moves, not toward the castle, not toward the people, just up, as if rising out of sleep, not in hunger, but in recognition. And all across the land begin to tilt, not to fall, to bow. It begins with the birds, or rather, the absence of them. No wings in the morning sky, no rustle from the tower ledges, not even the scattered remains of feathers, just gone, a stillness too large for silence. The king notices it from his balcony before dawn. He stands there, wrapped in nothing but a wool cloak of memory. Beneath him, the courtyard is washed in early gray light, the kind that makes everything look drawn by hand, deliberate, temporary. Something has taken the birds, or perhaps, something has made the sky forget it had them. In the kitchens, the salt has turned bitter. 3 servants taste it, one after the other. All is wrong. It looks the same. feels the same, but it stings the mouth in a way that has no culinary explanation. It's the kind of bitterness usually found in iron, or memory. By mid-morning, the castle's clocks have begun to skip. Only slightly, only enough that you notice it after. The tick of the east wing's great timepiece stalls, by half a breath, before resuming. A scribe records the lapse. When she checks the parchment an hour later, her notes have shifted forward in time. She reads words and behind them, a phrase written in smaller script, not hers. You are not keeping time. Time is keeping you. She does not return to her desk after that. The king meets with Imran again in the library. She has begun wearing gloves, not for the cold, but to avoid touching any book directly. Pages have grown wrong. One scroll rewrites itself in different ink every night. One codex hums at frequencies only the rats respond to. A ledger of population counts and to add names that no one remembers being born. Listen to this, says, unrolling a brittle page. A tax record from Hollow Ford, dated 37 years ago. The king waits. She reads, 1 goat, 4 hens, and 3 persons. He frowns. Persons. She nods. That's the word. Not peasants, not families, no persons. Singular. Unnamed. He says nothing for a moment. Then, are we being counted? Not by us, she says. Not anymore. That evening, the walls begin to sweat. Not water, not blood, something between. Thin, translucent moisture seeps from the stone, leaving streaks that glisten only when no one's looking directly at them. A guard touches it. He forgets the name of his father. Another touches it. He begins to speak in a language only trees respond to. They both are placed under silence, not punishment. Their voices now ripple, not echo. The steward suggests abandoning the west wing. The king shakes his head. Let the castle forget us on its own. Will not give it permission. The children are the first to adapt. They stop speaking at meals. They draw spirals on their bread crusts before eating. They wake with soil beneath their fingernails and say they've been walking inside. No one asks what inside means. No one wants to know where they've been. The king dreams again. But it's not his dream. He wakes with a song in his throat. Not sung, just shaped. A melody with no pitch. A rhythm not meant for ears. He writes his bed. By morning, it has bloomed into. By night, the moss has bloomed into something else. Imran brings him a letter. No seal. It simply says, the glen has turned. It now opens downward, and listens upward. A day later, the castle's oldest well is heard speaking. Not loudly, not often. Just a soft, repeated line. I was the throat. You were the words. A boy is caught leaning over it, whispering questions. When pulled away, he laughs, and says, it answered. What did it say? His smile fades. It said it didn't understand the question. The king convenes no council. He does not summon advisors. There is no point asking what has already begun to answer. Instead, he walks the perimeter, alone, traces the line where wall meets world, where border becomes invitation. The sky above no longer matches the day. It is dimmer, greener, and when he looks directly into the clouds, he sees architecture. Not faces, not shapes, just intent. In the forest, trees begin to bow lower, not to the wind, to direction, as if the entire grove is pointing, or bracing, or remembering something long suppressed. Birds do not return, but once, at dusk, a single feather falls onto the chapel steps. It is too large, too dark, and when the abbess touches it, she collapses. He awakens 3 hours later and whispers, it wasn't a feather, it was a decision. The king eats less. He drinks cold water and stale bread. No flavor, no indulgence. He knows it's watching, not to judge, but to absorb. One night, as the moon disappears, not behind clouds, but into something deeper, he walks the hall of portraits. They've all changed, not dramatically, just slightly, eyes a little deeper, mouth slightly closed, as if mid-thought, and all of them, even those painted centuries, seem to be looking at the same thing. Something behind the king. He does not turn around. He simply says, I see it too. And the candle in his hand sputters once, not out of air, but out of permission. By the end of the week, maps no longer work. Not because the roads have vanished, but because intent has. A knight sets out for the river, arrives at a hill. A scholar walks to the tower, reaches a void. Direction is no longer a matter of distance. It is a matter of memory, and memory has become selective. The abbess visits the king once more. They sit in the chapel ruins again. She brings nothing, only this. We are not haunted. We are being remembered. He nods. He already knew. And the castle, and stone and sacred mark, the foundation of the kingdom, not the one built with hands, but the one built with fear and silence, begins to crack. but not from pressure, from recollection. It had never been meant to hold this long, not this deep, not this awake. Above, the king stands at the tower's edge, looks out across a world that no longer pretends to be logical, and finally speaks to no one. The name was never mine. The land simply borrowed me. At dawn, the fog arrives, not crawling, not sweeping, but standing, a vertical thing, tall, still. It doesn't drift or waver. It settles like a memory no one gave permission to return, and it comes not from the riverbanks or the hills, but from within the castle walls themselves, as if something beneath the stone has decided it no longer wants to be unseen. The servants wake first, but they don't scream. They recognize it. A woman washing linens in the courtyard watches the mist rise between her hands and says, simply, "It's early this year." A boy polishing cutlery in the great hall pauses, closes his eyes, and whispers a name no one taught him. It is not panic. It is arrival. The king does not rise from his bed that morning, not from weakness, but from listening. The fog reaches his chamber slowly, one tendril at a time, as if checking whether he still remembers how to breathe. He sits upright. The crown lies on the floor where it has remained for 3 days. He steps over it without hesitation. In the corridor, it has settled at knee height. It curls around the torch brackets, climbs the walls like ivy that forgot it was ever a plant. He walks alone. No guards follow. No stewards interrupt. By now, they've learned, if you speak too loudly inside the fog, it answers back. Not with words, with mirroring. You speak. It repeats, but slightly wrong. The chapel bells ring 3 times. No one pulled the ropes. The sound is wrong. Not loud enough. Not sharp enough. The tone seems to echo inward, as if the stone is consuming the vibrations instead of letting them pass through. The king hears it from across the courtyard. He does not look toward the tower. It's there. In the scriptorium, Imrine works without ink. He has taken to carving into wax tablets now. Every time she writes with ink, the words rearrange themselves. Not randomly, but in last night she wrote, "This is the kingdom of man." The page shifted, and when she blinked, it said, "This is the man of kingdom." Then, "This is the man inside." Then, "This is the inside." And finally, "You are inside." Since the king walks the old wall path, where the battlements are crumbling and the stones smell of cold lichen and metal that once bled. From here, he can see the glen again, or what's left of it. It has changed shape, no longer a clearing, now a mouth, not literal, not with teeth or lips, but a pattern in the trees that resembles consumption, a spiral inward, not a crater, a decision. And in the center, where once there were stumps, something now stands, not tall, not wide, just undeniable, a figure, maybe, or a tree. Or a thought that's forgotten how to be abstract. He watches it. It watches back, without moving, without needing to. The children have stopped speaking. They communicate now. Circles drawn on walls, stones left in windows. Once, a girl places her finger on a map and begins to hum. The note is not musical. It vibrates the table, and lifts her hand. The ink has been removed. Not smudged, erased. The place no longer exists. They do not mark it again. That evening, the steward brings a message. It is carved into bone. He does not know where it came from. It simply appeared on the throne. A single phrase. "The land has done to walk without you." The king reads it aloud, then sets it in the fire. The flames darken, briefly, then return. But the bone does not burn. The abbess arrives before the midnight hour. She is barefoot. Are damp from something that isn't water. She kneels, not to him, to the floor, and whispers, "The chapel has reversed." He nods. "I felt it." She looks up. There are no saints left on the walls, only reflections. Of what? Of the watchers. He walks past her. He already knows where they wait. In the crypt below the crypt, a place so old the dust no longer rises when disturbed, there is a door, or what looks like one. A slab of stone, half sunk into the earth, with no handle, no hinge. Only the old seal of the first dynasty. A falcon, yes, but upside down. And beneath it, scratched by something that wasn't trying to be read. What the throne forgets, the soil repeats. He kneels. He places both hands on the slab, and breathes in, not air, memory. The stone moves, not away, down, as if remembering how to open. A scent rises, old cloth, blood warmed too long, the echo of decisions. He does not flinch. He does not hesitate. He steps through. The chamber is circular. No torches, no sconces, yet it glows. The walls are smooth, seamless, stone that feels like skin. At the center, a basin, empty, but heavy. He approaches. In it, a single object, a tooth, human, but not too long. He touches it, and sees, not visions, recollections, of things that did not happen to him, of things that did not happen to anyone. A field of screaming grass, a child with no mouth, a village built from the shadows of a tree that grows roots upward, a road that only exists while you are walking it, and underneath it all, the hum, not of sound, of remembrance. He pulls his hand back, and says, to the chamber, to the fog, to the watchers, I am ready. The hum stops, not with finality, with attention, and then, for the first time in days, a voice, not from the walls, not from the sky, from below. It does not speak in words, it speaks in weight, but the king hears it. Then kneel, and forget your name, so we may remember ours. He kneels, not as ritual, not as surrender, but as alignment. A man, reduced to posture, the crownless curve of spine, the hands open but unoffered, the breath no longer rhythmic, not his alone. The chamber does not respond, it doesn't need to, it adjusts. The air thickens slightly, not with pressure, but with presence, as if the space has noticed the change and is now rearranging itself to accommodate. The king feels the echo of his heartbeat in the floor, not against it, within it. The rhythm doesn't match. There is no time here, not in the way time usually behaves. There are no candles burning down, no shift of light through cracks, only the sense that something is waiting for his next movement to begin counting. But he doesn't move. He knows better. This is not a chamber for asking. This is a chamber for being unmade. Above, the castle had to creak, not from wind, not from weight, from recollection. Old walls shift by inches, doorways realign, or stretch longer than architecture allows. A servant finds herself walking a who should end in the west kitchen, but now opens into a room she has never seen. There is no furniture inside, only salt scattered on the floor in the shape of an eye. It blinks when she enters. She does not speak of it. She does not go back. In the library, Imrine watches words dissolve, not vanish, dissolve, as if the parchment no longer recognizes the ink, as if the language itself has been deemed inaccurate by something older. She opens a tome of laws written 4 dynasties ago. Each paragraph ends now in the same sentence. The land is correcting you. Back in the crypt below the crypt, the king lifts his eyes. Something has entered the chamber, not a body, not a shadow, something more honest, the first shape of all stories, the outline behind belief, before worship, before rule. He sees it not with sight, but removal. Every part of his perception that does not show the thing, that's where it is. Like trying to look at the gap in your memory and realizing the gap is looking back. It speaks again, not in voice, but in form. You have worn the surface long enough. The king does not answer. Instead, he lowers his head and places both hands on the stone, not to plead, but to allow. In the chapel ruins, the abbess feels written, not from fear, from recognition. She whispers a line older than her vows. Soil remembers, but stone regrets. Then she places him on the cracked altar, and something beneath is to breathe. The king feels the hum enter his skin. It isn't, it's translation. He is being read. Every memory, every decision, every fear, not just recorded, not weighed against morality, but against symmetry. He sees, in flash, the things that shaped him. His father's cough, growing louder each winter. His brother's scream, cut off mid-word by a crown that chose differently. The quiet, pleading look of the last man he executed, not for guilt, but for balance. All of it is lifted from him, not forgiven, not condemned, just understood. Then, at last, the basin changes. The tooth is gone. In its place, a root, thin, still wet, not from soil, from memory. The king reaches for it, not because he must, but because he's already been holding it for a long time. He just hadn't noticed. When he closes his fingers around it, the chamber widens, not physically, existentially. The air vibrates, the stone beneath him softens, and for a breath, just one, he feels the kingdom breathe with him, not the people, not the walls, the idea of it, the forgotten shape beneath the maps. He opens his eyes. He is no longer in the chamber. He is everywhere the soil his thoughts stretch through root and river and ruin. He sees the cities before they were cities. He hears the names that trees whisper when no one is there to hear them. He feels the weight of roads before they were paved, when they were only desire lines in the grass. And he understands, this land was never his. It permitted him, briefly, until now. Now, it remembers itself. And in remembering, it requires exchange, not surrender, not death, but redefinition. He wakes, but not in his body. His body still kneels, still breathes, still hums, but the part of him that rules has moved, upward, into the castle, into the walls, into the pattern. At that exact moment, Lady Mara drops her goblet in the dining hall. The wine spills upward, then freezes, then collapses into dust. She doesn't scream, she bows, to no one, because suddenly, she feels watched, not by eyes, by architecture. In the village outside the walls, a farmer watches his field rot and bloom at once. Half of his crops die in silence. The other half bear like faces, not real faces, but suggestions of them, as if the land is trying to recall what humans looked like, before forgetting was safer. And the fog, it has reached the coast, does not resist. It partakes, waves slow. Salt water grows warm, and in the tidal behind the cliffs, something grows, a root and wet, holding a tooth. Back beneath the castle, the king speaks his last sentence aloud, not to mark the end, but to honor it. I was never the shape, only the pressure holding it. Then he stands, the stone remembers how to support him, and the door behind him opens, without sound, without need. He walks through it, and the land, now fully awake, makes room for its true name. When he returns, the castle does not know him, not at first. The guards at the gate flinch, but do not draw their blades, do not flare, the doors do not groan, but something deeper, something built into the logic of the place, as if the stones beneath his boots are remembering him, and not entirely sure they should. He walks in silence, his cloak damp with the breath of the chamber below, not mud, not water, the kind of damp that comes from touching something that doesn't forget. The scent that's on him is not death, its origin. In the Hall of Names, where portraits line the walls from the first crown to the recently buried, he passes unhurried. Eyes once painted in triumph or sorrow now avert their gaze. Every frame is crooked, not a single one dares to hang level. And as he moves, the floor beneath shifts, no longer echoing steps, but softening them, not hiding, absorbing, like the earth welcoming something back. The steward finds him at the base of the stairwell. He does not speak at first. He only kneels, breathing he should for a man who hasn't run. The king waits. Then, it has reached the outer villages. The king nods. They're not evacuating, the steward adds. No, the king replies. They wouldn't. They're not either. Good. The steward swallows. There's something in the water now. When the horses drink, they stand still for hours. And the sheep have begun sleeping with their eyes open. The king looks past him, toward the high window. It is too pale to be called morning. What about the children? The steward lowers his head. They're speaking backwards, but the words make sense. The king ascends the steps slowly. He does not use the railing. His fingers trail along the stone, and the stone responds, fine dust flaking off in patterns to runes no living tongue can read. By the time he reaches the throne room, the fog has reached the rafters. Not visible, but present. It hums in the blood if you breathe too deep. The throne is as it always was. Tall, iron, built to suggest permanence. But now, it looks hollow. The light no longer touches it evenly. Its shadow bends at angles that do not follow geometry. And the seat itself seems too narrow, as if the idea of kingship has shrunk. He stands before it. He does not sit. Not yet. Instead, he kneels, one last time, and places his hand on the armrest. Beneath his palm, the once, then again, a pulse, faint, but real. It was never just a throne. It was a lid, placed atop something that couldn't be killed. Something that didn't need to eat, or wake. Only wait. And now, the waiting is over. In the lower halls, the steward finds Father Corlin standing beside a stained glass window. The priest is weeping, but the tears aren't his. They fall from his eyes, yes, but the pain isn't in his face. He is crying someone else's grief. Behind him, the window, the saint once pictured with outstretched arms now kneels, head bowed, cradling a small black hands. And above him, no sun, only the eye, wide, unblinking, ancient, watching nothing, remembering everything. Back in the throne room, the king speaks, not to the chamber, not to the land, to the thing beneath. I carried your silence, now carry mine. He sits. The metal does not groan, it accepts. And for the first time since the first stone was laid, stone does not reflect light. It drinks it, and the hall darkens. Elsewhere, the bells fall, not ring, fall, from towers, from hooks, from memory. They land without sound, just impact, no echo. The abbess climbs the spiral stairs of the bell tower barefoot. Her feet leave marks now, not footprints, but sigils, spreading slowly behind her as she ascends. The steps she walks are no longer steps, they are decisions. When she reaches the top, she finds no rope, no bell, only a hole, and wind that smells of teeth. She kneels beside it and whispers, we remember now. And the wind answers, not with laughter, the first sound the soil ever made. Below, in the courtyard, the trees have moved again, not grown, repositioned. Where once stood fountains, now stand trunks, silent, pale, bark smooth as breath. And from their branches, bones, not hanging, grown, each one shaped like a promise never kept. In the throne room, the council arrives, not summoned, drawn. Mara is first, is gone, but her eyes are clear. She says nothing, she doesn't need to. Darnik follows, no sword, just the hilt. The blade left somewhere along the western road, embedded in a riverbed that now hums like metal left too long. Imrine is last. Her fingers are black from writing in ash. She carries no books, only a small stone bowl filled with echoes. She places it at the foot of the throne. The king nods, and speaks one sentence. We do not rule now, we remind. The ceiling sighs, the wind changes direction, and the hall becomes a mouth, not literal, not devouring, just receiving. Every breath, every oath, every step taken in defiance of forgetting. The room does not collapse, it inhales. Outside the castle walls, no sun rises, only a slow, warm light from beneath the horizon. Like something beneath the world has been. And all across the kingdom, people stop what they're doing, not because they're afraid, but because they recognize it. This light, this warmth, this return. In the throne room, the king leans back, and the iron does not resist. He closes his eyes, not in weariness, in completion. He has sat not to claim, but to yield, not to govern, but to become. Far beneath the stone, where names once whispered now echo in full chorus, the first shape begins to stir. Not a god, not a monster, just the kingdom itself. Finally, remembering what it meant to be alive. They say the kingdom began as a prayer, before maps, before blood, before anyone thought to fences and call it theirs. There was only a single exhalation into an unnamed wilderness, a whisper sent into nothing, not to ask, but to see if something whispered back. Now, something has, and it's not an answer, it's a mirror. The king does not speak for 3 days, not out of silence, but out of translation. He is not mute, he is becoming legible. The words still arrive, but not aloud. They come through the stones, smoke, through the way the dust no longer settles in corners. The council meets him daily, and every day the throne feels less like a seat and more like a mouthpiece. The kingdom it's being spoken through, and all of them feel it, even the bricks, even the bones. In the village of Lower Grend, the river now flows in 2 directions, one forward, one backward. They meet in the center of the town and circle one another like animals sniffing an older version of themselves. Us is in a line, expecting trout. He pulls up a single tooth, long flat, polished, still warm. He does not fish again. In the forest, the animals no longer run from people. They watch. Foxes blinking too slowly, ouched in daylight. A stag that follows a hunter for 3 hours without blinking once. There is no violence, only attention. And for those who meet that gaze too long, there comes a change, not of body, of intent. They return to their homes and forget that of bread. They sleep outside. They stop using names. The king's dreams are no longer private. When he sleeps, if it can still be called sleep, the castle darkens by a shade. Not visibly, existentially. Colors lose their conviction. Fire burns cooler. Metal rings softer. The very air curls in toward him, like a hand cupped around a secret. In his dream, he walks an orchard where every tree bears shaped like decisions. He reaches for one, but it falls before he can touch it, bursts against the soil, and the soil sings. In the waking hours, he listens, not to his advisors, to the rooms themselves. The castle has become fluent in memory. The doors now open to where he needs to be, not where he intended. A corridor once leading to the royal archive now opens onto the garden of the dead queens, a courtyard buried 3 reigns ago. There are no markers, only vines shaped like sleeping hands. The abbess walks beside him. Does it want us to see this? She asks. He answers without looking. It doesn't want, it remembers. In the great hall, the hearth cracks. Not the fire, the stone. A line forms down the center of the mantle, revealing something behind it. Imrine is the first to approach. She touches the edge of the fissure. It then opens. Inside, not a passage, but a window. Looking down, not beneath the castle, beneath the idea of it. A glimpse of roots that twitch when spoken to. Of earth that has begun to mimic the architecture above. Not a copy, a predecessor. As if the castle is only the latest skin. That night, the stars fall silent. Astronomers report no movement, no glow. The heavens their faces away, not out of fear, out of deference. There are older lights now, emerging not from the sky, but from the ground. The children begin to draw again, not on paint. On the walls, lines, spirals, maps of places that don't exist. When they give the same answer, the inside of the outside. A boy who hasn't spoken since the fog came points to one spiral and says, "This is where the king learned how to kneel." They do not teach him this. They do not correct him. They do not ask him to stop. In the court, the nobles no longer argue, not openly. When disagreements arise, they are resolved not with debate but with stillness. The first to speak loses, because the halls now reward silence, and every misplaced word is archived, not by scribes, by the shadows. A knight returns from the northern ridge, alone, eyes burned white, though no fire touched him. He carries a branch, gnarled, carved with symbols that no one in the castle recognizes. When asked where he found it, he answers slowly, "It was holding me." They take the branch, place it in the throne room. It does not rot. It begins to hum. The king sits before it, listens, then says, "We must not build more. We must remember less." Mara doesn't understand. How can we protect the realm if we forget it? The king smiles, softly, because it's that's been remembering, and we've kept interrupting. The abbess confirms what one wants to say. It's no longer a matter of belief. What is it then? A matter of gravity. Imrine nods. The land is pulling us inward. Thought first, then name, then form. Some try to flee, small groups, silent departures. They vanish without resistance, but are seen again, not in body, in posture. Standing along the edge of the glen, barefoot, facing away from the castle, breathing in a rhythm that no longer syncs with human lungs. The root in the throne room sprouts, not visibly, but in meaning. Its presence deepens. The stone around it grows warm. The air above it hums in harmonic minor. At night, it casts a shadow that reaches further than light should allow. It has become a presence, no longer a relic, now, a voice. And the king listens, not with ears, with history. In the final pages of the oldest surviving manuscript, Imrine finds a warning carved into the binding, not the parchment. It reads, "The land does not forget, it only waits for you to stop pretending it did." The king dreams again. This time, he is not walking, he is planted. Roots emerging from his fingers, eyes blooming with moss, a mouth open, but not speaking, only growing. And in the dream, the land speaks back. But it says nothing in words, only a question shaped like a crown turned upside down. And the dream ends with a feeling, not dread, not joy, but completion, as if he has finally been translated. There is no ceremony, no trumpet, no procession. The king is crowned again, not by hand, not by church, not even by will, but by recognition. A second coronation that unfolds not in marble halls but in the soil of memory. At dawn, the iron crown is found lying beside the throne, not placed, grown, tendrils around its base, not vines, not roots, something in between, delicate, but firm, as if the land has finally decided, this shape matters, not as symbol, as sentence. He does not put it on. Instead, he holds it, and listens. The silence that follows is not empty, it is structured, like a space left between words so that something older can be read, and in that space, a truth begins to take form, not in speech, in pattern. Outside, the fog has thinned, not retreated, adjusted, as if it no longer needs to conceal, only to instruct. Villagers report dreams identical in detail, a spiral staircase, a well quit where the dishes hold bones of unspoken guilt, a door that only opens when you forget what you came to ask. No one speaks of them with fear, only with a new kind of reverence, as if they were given answers they weren't yet wise enough to phrase as questions. The castle breathes easier. Doors now open before you knock. Windows blink, not visibly, but with the rhythm of something sinking to blood flow rather than wind. The architecture has begun to feel, and what it feels is readiness. The king walks the long hall with the portraits again, except they're gone. Where once the ancestors lined the stone, kings, queens, usurpers, martyrs, now the walls hold only reflections, not mirrored glass, just the faint impression of a figure behind you that isn't there when you turn. Not sinister, present, as though every wall is remembering the shape of leadership before ego, before empire, before language could lie. In the center of the great hall, the root has flowered. It bears no petals, only light, a soft, slow glow, like something remembering its own name for the first time in centuries. The people gather, not called, not summoned, they simply know to come, and when they stand before it, they do not kneel, they simply listen. The king speaks, not loudly, not regally. His voice is like a stone set into water, not the splash, but the ripples. We mistook memory for silence. He steps forward. We mistook the land's patience for emptiness. Another step. But now, it remembers itself. And in doing so, it remembers us. He places the crown, not on his head, but on the floor before the bloom, and says, "Rule yourself." The room does not respond. The air does. It shifts, weightless, then heavier than breath. Afterward, the people leave one by one, not in awe, in recognition, as if something long resisted has finally been understood, not with the mind, but with the posture. Elsewhere, in villages where no child has spoken in weeks, the silence breaks, not with words, with song, 3 notes, low, rising, then falling again. It echoes through the fields at dusk, in perfect rhythm with the sway of branches. The song doesn't belong to any known tongue. It is not learned. It is remembered. In the deep woods, where the glen once opened like a wound, there is now a circle, 12 figures, no movement, barefoot. They are not priests, not prophets, not God. They are translators, each one dreaming in a different season, each one rooted, not buried, planted, like thoughts placed in fertile ground, waiting to bloom when the world forgets again. The steward approaches the king on the 3rd morning after the flowering. He has not slept. He no longer refers to him as your grace. He says, "There's no war left." The king nods. No army, no words, no will for one. The king turns toward the window. The hills are soft today. The grass sways like 1,000 throats agreeing. Then we prepare. For what? The steward asks. For when the land begins to speak aloud. Below the keep, in the forgotten wing, the crypt doors are open now. The dead do not rise, they simply adjust. Bones shift in their graves, aligning into newer shapes, not of men, but of intents. One femur hums, a jawbone splinters and becomes hollow like a flute. And in the far chamber, smiles, not in mockery, in recognition. The abbess walks the gardens. Prayers are now recited not in Latin, nor in the old tongue, but in listening. She no longer wears her habit. She wears wind. Every step the leaves shiver, not from cold, from memory. And every night, she leaves a single stone on the castle steps, each one marked with a spiral, not outward, inward. The children return to speech, but their language is not ours. They speak in patterns. Clap once, then whistle. In silence. Draw small circles in ash, then erase them before adults can read them. A woman asks him what these mean. He responds, "They're not for explaining, they're for holding." By week's end, the th's gone, not stolen, not removed, just absent, as if the land took it back the way it gives back leaves in spring, without notice, without negotiation, without explanation. And in its place, stone, flat, still warm. The king stands there for a long time. People gather, unsure. He turns to them, smiling gently. You don't need someone to sit above you. A pause. You need to remember how to stand together. They do not cheer. They do not bow. They do what they came for. They listen. And something in the stone beneath them thrums. That night, the stars return. But different. They blink in patterns that match the carvings the children left in the hallways weeks ago. One shepherd looks up and weeps. Not from joy, from familiarity. As though the sky has finally remembered its own face. And the king, he walks. Not into battle. Not into ceremony, into the soil. His crown remains behind, a fossil before its time, and as his footsteps into the roots and loam, the last echo of his voice is heard by no one, felt by all. Let the land rule itself. It remembers better than we ever could. He does not return, not in the way men usually mean it. There is no final address, no grave, no heir, just the trail. A single line of bent grass through the northern field, where the wind now hesitates. The king walked into the earth, and the earth kept him, not in death, but in use. Days pass, then weeks, but they do not pass like time. They pass like breath, in and out, a rhythm, tied not to the sun, the floorboards. The kingdom does not collapse, it calibrates. With the king gone, decisions are not made louder, they are made slower. Councils speak in circles now. Not to confuse, but to avoid corners. No laws are written, only remembered, not by scribes, but by roots. In the orchard behind the old granary, a tree begins to grow backward. It's toward the base. Its branches dig into the soil. The fruit blooms underground, red as ink, warm as blood. No one eats it, but they place it under their pillows, and wake knowing what they'd forgotten to fear. The children stop aging, not visibly. They still grow, teeth still fall, heights still shift. But the weight of years no longer touches them. They do not count birthdays. They do not ask what comes next. They simply walk the spiral paths by hands no one saw. And when they cross the center, they whisper things their parents pretend not to hear. He is in the shape beneath sleep. He took off his name and put it on the throne. We are not his subjects. We are his soil. The land outside the kingdom flourishes strangely. Borders no longer they invite, but not everyone makes it through. Enter with war in their hearts, and find their armor melting, not from heat, from irrelevance. Metal unlearns how to be cruel here. Swords forget how to wound. And men who came with violence, walk home weeping, carrying stones that hum when lied to. In a hamlet 2 valleys south, a mother gives birth to a child with bark beneath his fingernails. She tells no one. She raises him gently, and every night, she sings the 3-note lullaby heard in the kingdom's silent bloom. One evening, she finds the child humming it. To the ground, the moss curls closer, and she understands, not a child of the king, a child of what the king became. Imrai no longer writes. She listens. Her chambers are covered in unfinished sentences. Walls, floor, even her mirror. Each phrase halts mid-thought, waiting for permission to conclude. Sometimes, in the dead of night, the words finish themselves, in her own voice, but older. And when she wakes, a root has grown from the Lady Mara speaks only once a week. No meetings, but people come to her chambers, not for orders, but for remembering. She places her hand on their heads, their shoulders, their spines, and they leave, different, not corrected, realigned. In the chapel, the statues of saints have vanished entirely, not stolen, not shattered, simply forgotten. The altar is now a flat stone, cool to the touch, ringed with bones carved into symbols that do not belong to. When asked what it is now, the abbess replies, a mouth for remembering. And then she kneels. The throne room is sealed, not locked, just done. No one enters, no one tries. It is not taboo. It is not sacred. It is fulfilled. Some say you can still hear breathing behind the door, but those who truly listen know better. It isn't breathing. It's root work, language made of weight and dirt, syntax older than the bones of mountains, a dialect of persistence. In the western watchtower, the sky changes color, not just at sunset, always. Clouds now move in slow rotation, swirling like the spiral symbols etched on the barn doors across the fields. Lightning splits in silence, thunder answers in thought. And one night, a soldier on patrol reports hearing his mother's voice in the stars. She died 12 when he does not question it. He just salutes. New life returns, but differently. Farms still grow food, but now the soil chooses. Some fields accept seed, others reject it. Not from anger, from memory. Man knows what it was made to carry, and what it was not. And in time, the farmers learn to ask, not with voice, with silence. And the crops grow, not in rows, in sentences, one by one. Villages build circles of stone, no two alike, some smooth, some sharp, some buried halfway, some upright. When asked what they're for, the elders smile. They say, to sit in when the land speaks next, and it will, not in days, not in seasons, but when memory and silence align again, when someone forgets just enough for something deeper to be heard, when the roots need a new name to carry, and somewhere, far beneath the keep, beneath the chapel, beneath the memory of kingship itself, a pulse continues, not biological, symbolic, the hum of something satisfied, but not finished, something that waits, not with hunger, but with clarity. He is not missed, he is not mourned, he is held, like a shape remembered when the language fails, like the pressure of a hand you never saw coming, but always knew was there. And in the hearts of those who listen long enough, deep enough, a voice forms, gentle, heavy, uncrowned, and it says, this is not the end, it is only the part, where we finally, listen back. Nothing is broken, nothing has fallen, and yet, by the 16th week, the kingdom is no longer the same. It wears the same shape, towers, bridges, breath, but now it feels like a place translated into another language. Every room is a synonym of what it used to be. The fields still wave with wheat, the bells still chime when the wind obliges, and yet, everyone walks a little slower, speaks a little softer, not from fear, but from consequence, the awareness that something now listens to every intention, not just every sound. The kingdom remains, but it is no longer a place, it is a listener. In a northern village, a man tries to lie, just a small thing, about where he was last night, but when the words leave his mouth, they feel stuck, like wet cloth in the throat. His tongue slows, his breath shortens, the wind stops outside, and then the lie begins to change shape. He says he was in the market, buying flour. What comes out instead? I was buried in a field and the moon watched me eat silence. He does not try again. In the eastern hills, a child is born with closed eyes that do not open. She speaks by 6 days old. Her voice is quiet, steady. She names every person in the room, first name, middle, family line, but also the regret they've never spoken, the shape of the dream they can't remember, the sound their name makes to the earth. She does not cry. Her mother asks, "What are you?" The child replies, "I am what you left behind, when you walked forward too quickly." The abbess calls it the quiet restoration. Says it's not revolution, not even reformation. It's something subtler, older. Restoration implies returning something to how it was. This isn't that. This is the land finally speaking in full sentences, after listening to centuries of partial prayers. To refer to the old chapel not as sacred but as in translation. She replaces the altar stone with a circle of carved wood. It pulses, faintly, when approached with honesty. She keeps no congregation. People come alone now, to listen, not to be told what is holy, but to hear what remembers them. The fog has learned to follow, not cling, not consume, but accompany. It walks with those who wander too far from themselves. It finds the ones on the edge of forgetting and offers them a thread, sometimes in the form of a breeze, sometimes a whispered word, sometimes just a warm handprint left on a stone that was cold before. Imrine writes again, but not with ink, with ash. Her scrolls are no longer rolled, they are planted, buried in shallow soil across the old archives, and days later, weeks, sometimes, small shoots grow from the parchment. He doesn't harvest them. He simply notes where. A scroll on forgotten sprouts a vine of copper-colored leaves. A scroll on grows a single white flower that dies each morning and revives at night. A scroll left blank for 10 years grows nothing at all. He names the garden legibility. The people no longer ask who rules. The question has rotted. In its place is something simpler. What must I remember? And to this, the land replies in a flock of birds flying in the shape of a key, a drought broken by a single night of rain, and only over the orchard planted by an old apology. A fevered man healed after sleeping on the grave of a man he wronged and never mourned. These are no longer stories. They are verbs. They do not need to be understood, only felt. In the castle, the throne room remains sealed, yet its shape still presses against the kingdom, as if the ideal has become the heir's position. And in a dream shared by all the council on the same night, they are summoned before the empty throne. The room is filled with vines. No one speaks. The throne begins to hum, and slowly, they each remove their shoes and step into the soot that now covers the floor. They sink to their knees. And the voice, not from above, not from below, but from exactly where they are, says, "Remember nothing that taught you to be more than the others. Keep only what taught you to hold them." They wake weeping. Not all embrace the change. One village refuses to speak the new patterns. They keep old titles, wear polished boots, salute to ghosts. For months, they remain untouched. Then, without violence, the earth begins to curl back from them. Their water loses flavor. Their bread turns to dust in the mouth. Birdsong ends at the village border. No one dies, but no one is heard. Eventually, they stop resisting, not from threat, from loneliness. The children still speak the spiral tongue, not always aloud, sometimes with their fingers in dirt, sometimes with stones placed in windows, sometimes with sleep. When they laugh, we're telling it stories. They shake their heads, not it, us. One child, in the far west, sits beneath a tree and says, "The king is not gone. He is the dirt that holds still. He is the rule that no longer needs punishing. He is the line between names." When asked what that means, the child picks up a root and says, "He taught us how to sit still long enough to listen back." Then plants the root into the soil, and the root pulses. The seasons begin to move slower. Summer lingers, but not oppressively. Autumn spreads like ink in warm water. Winter hums instead of howling. The sky learns to soften, not always, but often enough. And in the long spaces between weather, the land speaks in gesture. A tree blooming out of rhythm. A wolf sleeping beside a child. A dead language reappearing in the rings of a tree. Not translated, just understood. And somewhere, far below the keep, in that place without flame, without throne, without name, the hum continues, softer, steadier, the rhythm not of a kingdom but of a world finally holding its own shape, not with fear, not with pride, but with roots. And from those roots, a voice, not his, not ours, just what's left when remembering finally finishes. What you called silence, was just me waiting, for your sentences, to learn, how to end. There are no borders now, not erased, not broken, unneeded. Maps still exist, drawn, carved, whispered, but they're not used for direction. They are used like lullabies, reminders that someone once believed the world could be contained on parchment. The people no longer ask, "Where are we?" They ask, "The listening list." And that's where they go, not to conquer, to attune. The castle's gates remain open, not as invitation, but as condition. A rule has settled over the land that no one speaks aloud. Whatever tries to lock itself away, has already lost the right to lead. And so the wind walks freely through the high halls. The rain washes unbothered across the steps, and strangers come not to bow, but to leave something behind. A name, a mistake, a tooth, a truth, each offering placed in the center of the courtyard, where moss now grows in the shape of a spiral, not outward, not inward, just, resting. In the southern groves, the trees have begun to change their bark. Letters form across their trunks, not carved, not grown, declared. Words and languages not spoken in centuries, and some that were never spoken at all. When read aloud, they echo backward, not in sound, but in memory. An old man places his hand on a phrase that says "I was here before salt," and begins to remember someone else's grief. He weeps, then sleeps for 3 days beneath the roots. When his first words are, "I know now how to die without leaving anything behind." The abbess no longer presides over, she now teaches pauses, how to leave a sentence unfinished, and listen to what tries to complete it, how to feel the space between, as a sacred chamber, not just an accident between vowels. At congregation, God no longer speaks in thunder, only in the way moss grows on the parts of the statue you stop touching. She wears no robes, only nails, and the scent of things that have already forgiven themselves. The council remains intact, but not for law. They meet now to tell each other what the land has remembered. Mara speaks first. The eastern stones have begun to shift again. The old well has closed its mouth. Darnik nods. His voice carries new. A flock of crows landed on the watchtower and didn't fly away. They watched the sunrise like they had never seen it before. Imrine offers the final note. The books no longer resist. The ones that used to rearrange themselves, they've gone still. I think the land is rewriting us. No one offers conclusions. They sit in the silence after, like it's a language. And in the doorway, a vine begins to bloom. The children now teach, not in classrooms, in corners, behind kitchens, in barns, in ditches filled with whispering water. They teach not what they know, but what has nested in them. A girl traces spiral sigils in ash and explains, "These aren't instructions, they're reminders." Of what? She just smiles. You'll know when the forgetting starts again. And yes, the forgetting will come. All things are eventually, even kingdoms that learn to kneel. Even trees that have tasted thought. Forgetting is not the villain here. It's the reset. Go. The loosening of the name you thought you had to die wearing. And the land knows this. It does resist it. It prepares. In the tower once used for exile, a door opens that no one remembers sealing. Inside, not prisoner, just a room. Empty, except for a single circle of light on the floor. A place for someone to sit, when they've remembered too much, and need to forget just enough to survive the next day. It becomes a custom, to sit there, alone, and allow the land to hold one thought for you, that you are no longer. No one asks what people leave behind. They return different. That is enough. The root in the throne room has in its place, a single stone, smooth, blank. When it warms, when lifted, it hums, and when placed at the center of any table, people begin to speak honestly. They do not know why. They do not try to understand it. It travels, now, carried from town to town, never stolen, only received. And each time it arrives, a new sentence is spoken aloud that no one knew they needed to say. Sentences like, "I only ever wanted to be touched without being edited. The war in me was never mine. I forgive the voice I used to silence myself." In the deepest chamber beneath the keep, beneath the floorboards of history, beneath the marrow of power, something stirs, not awakening, not rising, just shifting weight, like an idea changing sides in sleep. It is the memory of rule, the pattern of dominion, quietly settling into its final shape. Witness, and in that shape, there is no need for kings, no need for only caretakers, stewards, rememberers, the ones who hold soil like a sentence, and know when to let it finish itself. In the final days of that season, before the next forgetting begins, before new names try to overwrite the quiet, a single phrase is etched into the stone arch of the castle gate. No one knows, but no one questions it. It simply says, "Here, for a while, then we enough to stop, and far below, in the of the rootwork, in the soft thrum of foundation stones, a hum persists, the same one that began long before maps, long before crowns, long before the first name ever tried to own. It hums still, not as threat, not as promise, just as reminder, that this land, this soil, this pattern beneath language, is not sleeping, it is only waiting, for the next sentence, to begin. There are no borders now, not erased, not broken, unneeded. Maps still exist, drawn, carved, whispered, but they're not used for direction. They are used like lullabies, reminders that someone once believed the world could be contained on. The people no longer ask, where are we? They ask, where does the listening grow loudest? And that's where they go, not to conquer, to attune. The castle's gates remain open, not as invitation, but as condition. A rule has settled over the land that no one speaks aloud. Whatever tries to lock itself away, has already lost the right to lead. And so the wind walks freely through the high halls. The rain washes unbothered across the steps. And strangers come not to bow, but to leave something behind. A name, a mistake, a tooth, a truth, each offering placed in the center of the courtyard, where moss now grows in the shape of a spiral, not outward, not inward, just thing. In the southern groves, the trees have begun to change their bark. Letters form across their trunks, not carved, not grown, declared, words and languages not spoken in centuries, and some that were never spoken at all. When read aloud, they echo backward, not in sound, but in memory. An old man places his hand on a phrase that says I was here before salt, and begins to remember someone else's grief. He weeps, then sleeps for 3 days beneath the roots. When his first words are, I know now how to die without leaving anything behind. The abbess no longer presides over sermons. She now teaches pauses, how to leave a sentence unfinished, and listen to what tries to complete it, how to feel the space between, as a sacred chamber. Not just an accident between vowels. At congregation, God no longer speaks in thunder, only in the way moss grows on the parts of the statue you stop touching. She wears no robes, only dirt or fingernails, and the scent of things that have already forgiven themselves. The council remains intact, but not for law. They meet now to tell each other what the land has remembered. Mara speaks first. The eastern stones have begun to shift again. The old well has closed its mouth. Darnik nods. His voice carries new. A flock of crows landed on the watch and didn't fly away. They watched the sunrise like they had never seen it before. Imrine offers the final note. The books no longer resist. The ones that used to themselves, they've gone still. I think the land has finished rewriting us. No one offers conclusions. They sit in the silence after, like it's a language. And in the doorway, a vine begins to bloom. The children now teach, not in classrooms, in corners, behind kitchens, in barns, in ditches filled with whispering water. They teach not what they know, but what has nested in them. A girl traces spiral sigils in ash and explains, these aren't instructions, they're reminders. Of what? She just smiles. You'll know when the forgetting starts again. And yes, the forgetting will come. All things return to hunger eventually. Even kingdoms that learn to kneel, even trees that have tasted thought. Forgetting is not the villain here, it's the reset. The loosening of the name you thought you had to die wearing. And the land knows this. It doesn't resist it, it prepares. In the tower once used for exile, a door opens that no one remembers sealing. Inside, not punishment, not prisoner, just a room, empty, except for a single circle of light on the floor. A place for someone to sit, when they've remembered too much, and need to forget just enough to survive the next day. It becomes a custom, to sit there, alone, and allow the land to hold one thought for you, that you are no longer able to carry. No one asks what people leave behind. They return different. That is enough. The root in the throne room has, in its place, a single stone, smooth, blank. When it warms, when lifted, it hums. And when placed at the center of any table, people begin to speak honestly. They do not know why. They do not try to understand it. It travels, now, carried from town to town, never stolen, only received. And each time it arrives, a new sentence is spoken aloud that no one knew they needed to say. Sentences like, I only ever wanted to be touched without being edited. The war in me was never mine. I forgive the voice I used to silence myself. In the deepest chamber beneath the keep, beneath the floorboards of history, beneath the marrow of power, something stirs, not awakening, not rising, just shifting weight, like an idea changing sides in sleep. It is the memory of the pattern of dominion, quietly settling into its final shape. Witness, and in that shape, There is no need for kings, no need for sermons, only caretakers, stewards, rememberers, the ones who hold soil like a sentence, and know when to let it finish itself. In the final days of that season, before the next forgetting begins, before new names try to overwrite the quiet, a single phrase is etched into the stone arch of the castle gate. No one knows who wrote it, but no one questions it. It simply says, "Here, for a while, then we enough to stop." And far below, in the work, in the soft thrum of foundation stones, a hum persists, the same one that began long before maps, long before crowns, long before the first name ever tried to own. It hums still, not as threat, not as promise, just as reminder, that this land, this soil, this pattern beneath language, is not sleeping, it is only waiting, for the next sentence, to begin. In the stillness of a world that no longer, the soil listens, and beneath it, a root, thin, weathered, deliberate, begins, not because it was summoned, not because it was ready, but because something in the breath of things said, now. The child who said, again, does not speak again that day. They simply sit in the center of the keep, knees tucked beneath them, hand on the floor, head bowed as if listening to an old song that can only be heard once and never repeated. No adults interfere, no guards stand watch. They all understand, this moment does not belong to them. From every corner of the kingdom, something begins to lean inward, not visibly, but the trees grow no taller, but the wind shifts so their branches point toward the keep. The birds do not fly closer, but they sing in patterns that draw the air at place. Even the rivers change their sound, with a slower rhythm, like they're dragging something heavy toward a memory. It is not reverence, it is participation. The kingdom has begun to fold in on the center, not collapsing, listening. The people call it the gathering, not an event, a condition. They feel it in their joints, in their breath, in the way the sky holds a certain stillness, as if bracing for a story to continue after a very long comma. In one village, a woman wakes from a dream where she saw all the names of the world braided into a single strand of hair. In another, a farmer finds his own reflection in the eyes of a sleeping fox. In the valley between them, a child points to the moon and, it's watching us now, with the king's memory. The abbess is gone, but her chapel remains open. Visitors come and leave without schedule. Some walk through without stopping. Others sit for hours with their eyes closed, breathing the dust, tracing the stone. But all of them, at some point, of the altar, where nothing stands, no symbol, no icon, only a smooth stone and a patch of moss growing in the shape of a question mark. Most kneel, some bow. One woman lays her wedding ring there and walks away barefoot. When someone asks her why, because the question became more beautiful than the answer ever was. The children return to the keep in pairs now, not summoned, drawn. They arrive from the west and east, from forests and cliffs and deserts made of dust so ancient it hums underfoot. They do not speak much. They gather in the great chamber, around the child who began it. They do not ask what to do. They wait, they breathe, and the stone beneath them begins to warm. Beneath that stone, the root begins to grow upward, not quickly, not visibly, but with the pressure of certainty. It remembers the first king. It remembers the soil he gave himself to. It remembers the centuries of war and language and noise. It remembers the sound of forgetting, and the longer rhythm of return. It is not a plant. It is not a relic. It is a sentence that was paused for 1,000 years. Now, it continues. The council no longer governs, but they gather one last time. Mera, hair white now, hands soft from years of soil. Darnik, his sword finally rusted, worn around the hilt from being held, not used. Imrine, eyes closed, speaking softly to the names dated into the scrolls. They meet beneath the tree, the old table. Its leaves are like punctuation, commas, ellipses, unfinished thoughts. Mera places her hand on the bark and says, "We were never meant to finish anything, only to hold the page open long enough, for something better to arrive." And the wind answers, with silence, and the tree begins to drop its leaves. Each one lands in a different part of the kingdom. And wherever, a river curves, a child sings, a gate opens that had been rusted shut for decades. In the keep, the child who began it opens their eyes, and says one word, beneath. The floor opens, not splits, opens, like the soil remembering it once held something precious. A spiral stair descends into darkness that breathes. The children follow, one by one, no fear, no torches. They walk downward, as if they've done it before. In other lives, or in dreams so old the brain forgot how to carry them. What they find below is not a tomb, not a chamber, not a root. It is a mirror made of dirt and light. It does not reflect faces, it reflects patterns, the shape of how someone listens, the curve of how someone waits, the echo of what someone left unsaid. Each child steps forward, and the mirror doesn't it offers a path, not forward, but inward. They do not return for 7 days. When they emerge, they carry nothing, except a different way of standing. No one questions them. The people understand. The sentence has begun again. No crown is made, no king is named, but the land leans easier, the wells run deeper, the birds begin to hum, not songs, but remembered silences. And in the fields, when someone touches the earth now, they sometimes feel it touch back, not as warmth, not as voice, but as recognition. And far beneath the castle, where the root once hummed in the dark, where the king once knelt in apology and not power, there is no hum now, only the afterglow of a truth too large to hold in words, a root that finally reached light, a sentence that didn't need punctuation to end, and the sound that remains, is not a sound, it's a feeling. It says, "You may rest now." The listening continues. Without you, by the 20th spiral, the kingdom has no edge, not because the land expanded, but because the need to measure it dissolved. Nobody speaks of kingdoms anymore, only of weather, of route, of the direction the wind carries a thought when it's no longer yours to carry. There are still fires in hearths, bread in ovens, laughter, sometimes, when the fog is light, but it's quieter now, not out of mourning, out of respect. This is not a land of rulers, it is a land that listens, and the more it listens, the less it needs to explain itself. The last story told in the old tavern is not spoken aloud. It's poured into a bowl of water, 3 drops of oil, a small twig, and the breath of someone who forgave something they never named. The bowl is left by the door. In the morning, the water is still, and everyone understands. That story has been accepted. It no longer needs a listener. In the hills, the trees stop blooming in spring. They now bloom when grief softens, and the people wait. They don't force the season. They, like a letter from someone who never knew how to sign their name. And when the blossoms come, they don't fall. They rest, on shoulders, on rooftops that no longer tremble when remembering. The spiral paths once drawn in at the children are now walked by all, not in ceremony, in recognition. Each loop is a kind of sentence, each curve, a word without language. By the time someone reaches the center, they do not arrive. They simply become quiet enough for something older to speak through them. And when they leave the spiral, they do not explain what they felt. They just nod, as if to say, "Yes, I remember what I never knew." The mirror in the chamber beneath the keep still glows, faintly, only when someone enters with a truth they haven't yet named. It shows no image, only pressure, like the weight of your name before you ever spoke it. And those who face it long enough, begin to feel the shape of the lie they were told about themselves, unfolding, like a fist unclenching, not erased, just, released. In the north, a wind passes through a ruined barn. It whistles a tune no one alive composed, but when an old woman hears it, she hums along and weeps. Later, daughter, that was the lullaby I was never sung, and I think the land just made it up, to heal the part of me that never stopped waiting for it. There are no graves, only seeds, no stone markers, no inscriptions. When someone dies, they are buried with one sentence written on a slip of bark. The sentence is never repeated aloud. It is burned in the soil beside them. Not to preserve memory, but to let the land hold what people can't. And in spring, a plant grows, never the same twice, each leaf shaped like a vowel that didn't need to be spoken, each stem curved like someone leaning in to listen. The last child to beneath the keep never returns. No one goes looking, not out of indifference, but out of completion. They understand now, some things don't leave, they become what stays behind. And in time, that child is felt in the air, before storms, in the hesitation before an apology, in the softness of bread broken with an enemy you stopped needing to punish. Not a ghost, a presence, not haunting, just continuing. And the keep, it stands, but no longer as a monument, or a warning, or a house for power. It is a place you visit, when you've remembered too much, and need to forget gently. Your shoes at the gate, you walk the halls barefoot, you speak only once, if at all. And when you leave, the dust clings to your feet, in the shape of a name you were brave enough to ask for. Until now, in the valley where the first sword was ever, a blade-shaped tree grows. It hums when people pass, and if you touch it in silence, you'll hear something that sounds like a sigh, but deeper, older, like forgiveness, given long as expected, not out of mercy, out of understanding, and beneath all of it, soil and silence and soft footsteps. The root sleeps, not because it's tired, but because it's done. The sentence it carried for century, through flesh and stone, and resistance, through voice and vow, is complete, not with a period, but with soil, and now it rests, like a breath at the end of a song, that no one dares to clap for, because the silence after, is more beautiful, than any applause. Somewhere, a child asks, what was a king? And the answer comes, gently, a name we used, before we knew how to kneel. There is no ending, only ground that holds you, as you begin again, and beneath it all, not a throne, not a crown, not a ruler, just a sentence, still being listened to.